pledge again?
Sure.
Dale, do you want us to do the pledge again? No. Okay. So this is a regular meeting of the Town of South Kingstown Town Council. The date is May 3rd, 2010, and the time is 7 p.m. We did the Pledge of Allegiance. We just didn't have the volume on. Next, we're going to do the roll call. Dale, could you please do the roll call?
Council President Fogarty.
Here?
Council Vice President Eddy.
Here.
Councilwoman McAtee.
Here.
Councilman O'Neill.
Here.
Councilwoman Whaley. Here. All members present.
Thank you, Dale. So next is a public hearing to consider and to adopt the town council's final budget for year 2010-2011 as amended, as shown on Exhibit 1 attached here too. So if anybody wants to take a look at that, I think we're all pretty familiar with this. We've had an overview of what's happened on this. Steve, I don't know if you want to give a quick updated overview on the budget and what we've done thus far.
The budget before you is the budget that was adopted by the council in late March as the preliminary budget of the town council. Subsequent to the adoption of the preliminary budget, the council held 2 work sessions, one on March 14th and one on March 15th. The council is now in a position to adopt the final adopted budget with or without amendment from the preliminary budget. I can go through any level of detail that the council likes. We can walk through the budget process that we began last December, on December 7th with the initial meeting of the council and the school committee. We then had meetings of the council on January 20th on the capital budget and the status of their operating program. My budget was submitted to the council on March 1st. The council held hearings on March 1st, 2nd, 4th, and 10th. The council then adopted the budget on March 22nd, and as I noted, on April 14th and 15th, the council held public hearings on that preliminary budget and took testimony from all that wished to be heard. The council, under the provisions of the charter, also provided for the ability for qualified electors to submit petitions that would need to be voted on this evening. None were received during the period which went up through April 21st. Therefore, we're now at the May 3rd final adoption hearing without the need to address any citizen petitions. The entire budget is as presented and presented in the newspaper, as well as on the town's website. The detail that's provided is the same that went through the preliminary budget. The Exhibit 1 shows the general fund for a total of $72,783,253. This is a $666,953 reduction from the adopted budget for the 2009-2010 year, or approximately 0.9% reduction. As far as the municipal program is down $407,000, where the school program is down $260,000 from what had been adopted in the 9-10 year, again totaling the $666,953 reduction. The major change in the revenue statement is a projected revenue loss of approximately $1,948,000. In state revenue, this is based on the anticipated state abandonment of the motor vehicle excise tax reimbursement on the first $6,000 in value for each vehicle in the community. I would note that the town is currently going through a property revaluation. The most recent estimates for the final roll, which will be certified on or about June 15th, is a residential value loss of about $802 million. That's about 17.8% on residential properties. This includes all classes within the residential rank itself. Commercial properties are down about 10.3%, or about $63 million. And industrial and utilities are down about 8.7%, or about $7 million. The overall reduction at this point, had a revaluation not occurred, is estimated at $8,730,000. 873, total reduction is estimated at about $873 million of the total roll. This is about a 16.7% reduction that's anticipated at this point. There's still several components of the tax roll that are going to be adjusted before final numbers are available. I would say to you that at this point, if the budget as presented were adopted and the tax levy were established as proposed at the level of $65,499,458, which is a $995,000 increase over the current year levy, that we would estimate the tax rate most likely at about $14.15. When I say most likely, that's assuming the revaluation occurs, which we know will happen, and that the state abandons the motor vehicle reimbursement program, which means that the full motor vehicle values will be used in the 2010-2011 roll. That means that we would be taxing about $126 million more in motor vehicles. That's the value associated with the $6,000 exemption at this point. Because we will be taxing at full value rather than the net of $6,000, will generate through the motor vehicle roll about $2.35 million more than we would if the program were maintained by the state. That rate of $14.15 for the real estate roll, we're also assuming that for every $6,000 in new value that would be picked up on the roll, taxpayers would be looking at about $112.26 per vehicle that they would pay more. A less likely scenario would be, with the revaluation, no change in the motor vehicle program. In other words, the state would continue to provide the $2 million in income to afford the $6,000 assessment reduction to continue in place. That would put the real estate rate at about $14.22. The differential there is that we would anticipate, if the program were to continue, no more than $2 million. Our experience has been estimates that have been made for what the value of the roll transfer from the state would be, has been subject to supplemental budget reductions. So we would not estimate to the full $2.3 million. We would estimate it to $2, similar to what we did in the current year. But there would, at that rate of $14.22, there would be no increase in cost associated or anticipated with the motor vehicles that people would be receiving tax bills on. The least likely scenario would be that the revaluation occurs and the state would require that the $6,000 exemption stay in place but not provide the revenue stream. If that were to occur, we would see a real estate rate of about $14.69. So there's three different scenarios that we're looking at. Those three scenarios will be determined subsequent to the state's adoption of its budget for the 2011 year. As I say, the most likely scenario would be the abandonment of the program, the loss of the revenue as has been anticipated in the development of the budget, and a forecast rate around $14.15. And that's up about a nickel from where we were when we did the preliminary budget estimates, because since that time we've had the reval company has met with all that were appealing the values, and they have made appropriate reductions to correct any errors or overestimates that they had in their preliminary numbers. That is a summary. I can go into any level of detail that the council wants on any of the components of the budget. I would also mention that Exhibit 1 includes not just the general fund. The general fund does provide for the only fund that deals with the property tax. That's the only place where property taxes are raised. taxes that are transferred to the schools come from the general fund. The school fund is also documented in Exhibit 1 at what had been requested by the school committee and submitted to the manager back in February, which is a budget of $58,647,873. Also included in the exhibit are the individual accounting funds that are used for various other accounts, such as the Peacedale Office Building, the Neighborhood Guild, and the 3 enterprise funds, water, wastewater, and solid waste. The last fund that's listed is the Senior Services Program, which has some transfer of municipal tax levy that's raised in the general fund, just as the schools receive funding. The final page of Exhibit 1 shows a budget summary of all of the 8 funds that are used for the budget process, showing a total budget recommendation of $89,665,282. That's net of the transfers where monies would be double counted, such as the $47,909,000, which is the property tax transfer from the general fund to the school fund, as well as the transfer to the senior services program. So with that as a summary, I'll turn it back to you, Kathy, in terms of addressing any questions that you or the council may have relative to the budget document.
Okay. Does any of the council members have any questions on the budget? Anything that they want to go over? Okay, Carol?
I just wanted to, on the preliminary budget, we were at $14.10, and you were saying $14.15, but I think you cleared that up. That was,
Yeah, the 1415 is still an estimate. It's not a final number. But what I've done is I've taken all of the revisions that have been made since we put the preliminary budget estimate together on roll value and recalculated that. With that recalculation, it would be around 1415.
so the total net budget is the same.
The budget stays the
It's
same,
just-
and so does the tax levy. The tax levy hasn't changed. It's just what the rate would be to be able to generate that amount of tax dollars.
I see.
And as I
that's all
say, this,
based on the revaluation.
I beg your pardon?
That comes because of the revaluation.
That's correct.
Right. Okay.
Any other questions regarding it? No? Jim?
Yes, Steve, are you going to, is the tax bill still going to be one?
Could you folks use those mics, because we're really having trouble out here hearing.
Are you on?
Is the tax bill still going to be one piece of paper with 4 quarters on there showing the residential rate and the automobiles?
Just as it always has been in the past, yes.
Okay, so really, no matter what way we look at this, if we're going to absorb the extra of an average household, 2 $6,000 automobiles, they're looking at $14.50 plus $250 roughly. So they're going to everybody's winding up at $14.69 unless you have 2 automobiles or 1 automobile less than $6,000 of value.
I would say technically, yes. Obviously, the rate would be at $14.15, but because you are paying that extra $112.26 per motor vehicle, then the effective rate would take it up to that level, yes.
Okay. Any clues?
And again, that's assuming that there's no money coming in from the state, which is what we've budgeted.
Yeah. Any hints from the fire districts where they stand with last year's tax rate?
I have no information on the fire districts at this time.
Okay. And then lastly, how do we vote on this baby tonight? Does Kathy present it in whole, or do we go through this piecemeal and can yay or nay it? How are we doing this tonight?
It's really the direction of the council. In the past, the council has adopted the budget as one item. There's also been times in the past where the council has, well, actually, since the charter changes, it's been adopted in its total. But there's no reason why, if a council member wished to see amendments to the budget on any given line items, that they could not put forward that as an amendment to the preliminary budget. My recommendation would be for the council to place on the floor adoption of the budget and then entertain any type of motions for amendment to the budget thereto. And that could be done on a line item basis, or it could be done on a bottom line basis.
Okay.
To the council.
didn't mean to ask Steve, Kathy, I didn't know if you...
Well, that's what we usually done in the years
Yeah.
past, is as a
Yeah.
whole.
No, I didn't know if the charter changed, so...
No, it's since the charter, that's how we've been doing it.
Yep. So from a council standpoint, we can put an amendment in.
That's correct. If you wish to reduce a line item, you would be able to reduce that line item. I would caution if you wanted to change revenues, we would certainly want to look at what those revenue adjustments would be. Alan and I are bound by the responsibility of the charter and good financial practices not to budget dollars that we don't anticipate receipt of.
Okay, so, any other questions for Steve before we go on here? Then hearing none, since we're on public hearing item A, does everyone give a motion?
Kathy?
Okay, oh, do you have, I'm sorry,
There's
do you
two
have correspondence?
communications
Okay,
that have
yes.
been, that were, emails that were received on Friday, April 30th. One from Abby Colby Cooper and the other from VK Vorhaven. Both supporting the 4 neighborhood elementary schools and opposing the closing of Wakefield Elementary.
Okay, thank you, Dale. Your correspondence?
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Well, if the audience has any questions, if there's nothing from the council, or I can take a motion. Come to the, if you want, you can come to the microphone. Please state your name for the record.
My name is Eileen Daly LaBelle. I have to apologize. I'm very nervous about doing this. Public speaking is probably my biggest fear, but the issues are too important this year not to speak. First, I wanted to thank all of you who showed up yesterday for the Sari Sanctuary opening. Knowing Sarah and her family for the past 9 years, I thought it was a beautiful way to honor her and her family. Special thanks to Andy Nada, who, along with the town, supported us through this very lengthy and challenging process of building the classroom. I know he knows we were next to a sewer line and there was a lot of concern, and so a lot of caution had to be taken, and so thank you. I guess to start at the beginning, I've heard that this budget is a process. I've listened to that at this. I've tried to attend as many meetings as I can. In January or February, I believe the decision was made to level fund the schools. And I believe Mr. Alfred asked the school committee to come up with a budget that would level fund the schools. At that point, in order to do that, the school committee, out of their proposed budget, took out $1.2 million in various cuts. I've now heard Dr. Stringfellow say she's been asked to prepare for a potential $926,000 shortfall in state revenue. I don't know if I can ask you, Mr. Alfred, have you asked her to prepare for that, or I'm not sure how she was directed to?
First, let me correct you. The school superintendent submitted a budget to the school committee that was then reduced by $1.2 million. It was not the school committee's budget that was reduced by $1.2 million.
Okay, the superintendent's original budget.
And most superintendents' budgets are reduced on an annual basis before they get into the town manager's budget.
Okay, thank you.
I did request and advise that I would not be supporting any tax levy increase for the school department for the 2010-2011 year. The school committee did provide reductions to be able to bring that budget that was submitted to me in February in line. At the time that my budget was released, in my budget message, and that was released before March 1st, indicated that I had concerns with the revenue statement as presented by the school committee's budget, and that I anticipated that that budget could be as much as $458,000 short. Subsequent to that, the Commissioner of Education proposed a funding formula that during the first year, South Kingstown would lose additional dollars. The total of what the potential loss of $468,000 plus the $458,000 that I thought that they were over budgeted for in the revenue statement totaled about $926,000. In my budget message, I said to the school committee, and I have continued to say to the school committee, that you need to provide for a contingency plan on how you would adjust your budget if, in fact, the worst-case scenarios were to happen. The funding formula were approved as presented, and if the revenue that came for the school department from just general state aid were reduced based on the state being short $458,000. The school committee has taken the challenge that I've given to them and said to them, you need to be able to tell the public what it is that you would do if you lost the first $300,000. What would you do if you lost $500,000, and so forth. The school department at this point has not provided a public explanation as to how they would deal with those budget contingencies, but it's not something new that's been asked for. It's something that goes back to my budget message. It's something that anybody who prepares a budget needs to be prepared to do based on the uncertainty of times that we live in today. In the last 3 years, there's been supplemental budgets at the state level that have reduced levels of transfers to the cities and towns mid-year. I'm not at all unrealistic in my posture that I believe that there could be the need for a supplemental budget for 2011. And what I've said to the school committee is better prepared at this time than to have to try to deal with it 6 months into the fiscal year. So I think that's a long answer, but I wanted to correct some of the misconception that you may have had.
Sure, thank you for your explanation. Clearly, you're more involved day to day on this than I am. So according to Dr. Stringfellow, in order to prepare for a potential $926,000 shortfall, she has asked the school committee, she has presented several presentations, and the last one, she's asked them to vote by May 25th on any structural changes to the school. They need time as a school system to prepare for next year, if there will be a redistricting or whatever will happen. So they can't wait for the state to fully come through with whatever may happen. As I read the newspaper the past week, one of the school committee members, Mr. Angeli, said it would be an educated guess scenario at the time of the vote on the school structure. So, to me, having followed this process, each of the superintendent's presentations have leaned heavily in favor of closing Wakefield School. I continue to question her, and I realize you have no say over where the superintendent makes her cuts. I will continue to question her presentations. I don't believe we've seen one that is balanced yet. To me, with that information, it looks like the best educated guess is going to be to close Wakefield School to prepare for potential state cuts. I heard at the last budget meeting that the town council believes this budget is not a vote to close the school. I think it's semantics. That's my personal view. To me, we know that state cuts are coming we don't know. I mean, I've sat at these meetings now, and you've sat at many more than I have, where we hear time after time, more cuts, more cuts, more cuts coming. So we passed this budget that level funds the school, but really, in reality, we know that the school committee will have to make a decision by May 25th as to what the school structure will look like next year. I don't know that they'll have all the information from the state at that point. I'm not suggesting that's your responsibility. Clearly, you're waiting for information from the state, too. But to me, this budget that you're voting on tonight does have an impact on whether the school committee will vote to close the school. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Is there anybody else? Please come forward and state your name for the record.
I'm Steve Corley. I live at 1090 Plains Road, and I just wanted to commend you guys on trying to maintain a level-funded budget. It's been tough times. I haven't had a raise in 3 years, and I've actually had a reduction in salary because my hours are cut. Haven't been laid off, but hours are cut, and I think a lot of people share that same pain. Really, I came in to say that, you have a level budget this year, but until we start to address our future liabilities, i.e. retirements and all that for our staffs, we're never going to keep budgets under control in the future. Most places, you don't get free health care for the rest of your life, and you don't get a salary for the rest of your life after you retire. And if you look at most retirements, they're Ponzi schemes. Unless you have a growing community that can support all those growing salaries, especially people getting older and older before we die, which is a great thing. You just can't afford it. And the auto industry learned that, and a bunch of other industries learned that. So that's really, we need to start addressing that. It's not going to happen this year, but it will be happening. School closings. I kind of read, I was disheartened. You had the vote about closing a Wakefield, whether or not you wanted to address just telling the school committee that they couldn't do it. And I read one of the comments was, we didn't want to tell the school committee, we didn't want to hold their hand. And I just wanted to remind everybody that this is where the buck stops, at the town council. So if you have a concern, this is where it stops. The town council has the big picture. And I came to a planning meeting, and one of the things that URI said is that they want to make an incubator for pharmacy and technology and all that stuff. And if we want to work as a town with URI, if we're going to close a school, the one that makes the most sense is West Kingston, because it's right at the gateway to URI. As a young man growing up, I went to an elementary school. I lived just under a mile, so I had to walk. Guys just over a mile took the bus. My junior high was 9 miles away. My high school was 12 miles away. At my elementary school, kids got bused from 9 or 10 miles away. It works. I lived it. Your parents drive you, you got to go to your friend's house far away. And when you get to high school, people got cars, and it just works. If you want to close Wakefield, the idea should be that you're going to put something in Wakefield that makes sense. To just close it, what's going to fill the void, the vacuum? If you close West Kingston and you work with URI, at least you have something that's going to fill the vacuum. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Kathy?
Yes.
I just want to clarify a couple of points. First, the town of South Kingstown does not provide health care for life.
Yeah.
In fact, police and fire are the only contracts that we provide health care in retirement till age 65. EMS, NEA, and non-organized receive a stipend over a 3-year period. That's it. There is no health care in life. As far as pension is concerned, the pension system that the town operates with, outside of what is part of the state system for teachers, is over 98% funded.
Yes.
We are also one of the first communities to establish a trust for OPEB purposes, and we have contributed to that as a means of being able to deal with post-employment health care costs. So as a community, our budget does reflect costs to be able to ensure that pensions are properly funded, that the benefits for post-employment are funded, and our benefits for post-employment health care associated are very limited.
Yes, I'm glad you pointed that out. I actually saw your letter, too, in the Independent, I believe it was, talking about the research facility and maybe using West Kingston. URI is working on in early development of their own facility on their own campus site. And if there was a need for a facility that they were looking to go off campus for, South Road School is actually even, well, I don't know exactly close, but very close proximity that is still also available. So I did see your article in the paper, and that did stick in my mind. I know you went to one of the community planning, comprehensive plan updates, and you also had some questions about the farms, too, and use of the farms, and that they might be used to be gone in a few years down the road. And I actually thought that, it might be, good for you maybe to look up. We have also the farm, forest, and open space provision in the town. Again, looking at the big picture, that we provide to the farmers who enroll in that very discounted rates on their farmlands, where they really just pay for kind of where the houses are, to keep the farms here in the town of South Kingstown. That's why the town of South Kingstown looks the way it does today. Because we want to keep the farmers here. That's something that this council has been very active on. That's the big picture that we look at. So I did read your article. I'm glad that you came up to the microphone, because there are a couple of different points that I wanted to address in regards to some of the things that you brought up in the paper. So, and again, I'm glad that Steve pointed it out, because we are fully funded here, and again, we do not provide the health care. That's some of the things that we've talked about at some of the different meetings that we've gone to. And Alan, do you want to add to that, too?
Yeah, just to add a couple more things to what Steve said. With the police who do have it to age 65, that's based on labor law. They have binding arbitration. So when you go into a binding arbitration, you're being compared to other communities. So a lot of other police departments do have it in life. We're fortunate that we cut it off at 65. But if you go into binding arbitration, it's a win or a lose situation. There's no in between. So we feel that program for the police is comparable to other communities of similar size, and with the financial resources that we have. In addition to that, I just want to mention, as far as the contribution rates, because I think that's important. On the police department, the employee contributes 9%. Over the last 22 years, the town employer contribution for that same plan has averaged 6.72%. So the employee is contributing more. On the EMS, it's 9%, and their average is 7.52%. On the muni side, the employee contributes 7%. The average over the last 22 years for the employer contribution is 2.68%. So for every $10 going into that retirement system, the employee is contributing $7.
Thank you. You guys kind of separated out the teachers and all that stuff. I know they have different contracts and all that. Everybody has different contracts. It's just stuff to look at in the future. I'm not saying it's stuff to be adopted or not. It's just stuff to look at. As far as farms go, and I love the open farms, but sooner or later, what happens, especially with our turf fields, which is, I hate to say it, is strip mining. I love the turf fields by my house, but it's strip mining. Every time you harvest a layer, you're taking away a layer of soil. Eventually people go, well, if I pay all the fines that I have because I had a reduction in my taxes, you look at it and you say, well, I'm better off being able to sell my property. I don't want to farm it anymore, my kids don't want to farm it anymore. Those kind of things happen. I've lived in communities or been in, near communities. Like, across the street from my grandmother was a big open field with horses in it. Now you go there and there's 40-story skyscrapers. Went to the beaches along the ocean in Delaware, little cabins and all that. Now there's 30-story skyscrapers and condos. Things change. And when it becomes financially reasonable for somebody to do those things. And, I'm not sure where all the schools are, but even if URI does something on campus, the idea would be that they could grow enough interest in businesses to come here. They're probably not going to put all of them on campus. And someplace close to campus would make sense. West Kingston, hopefully, we're going to have a railroad station, commuter set up with Providence. Just everything to jive with that future planning is what my point is to consider with the school planning, i.e., what are you going to fill the voids with at different places? Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay. Anybody else? Oh, Jim?
Well, yeah, Mr. Corley, I just wanted to thank you for the big picture view. The town has, as you've just heard, done an excellent job keeping pensions and health care and post-retirement health care under control. But you're right to look at the big picture, because if you've read the paper lately, you'll see that half our cities and towns have about a $3 billion unfunded post-retirement health care liability. You'll see about half those cities and towns, again, have another almost $2 billion of unfunded pension. Now, everyone can say that's their responsibility, but you and I both know where the political power is in the state, and every year we look at less and less dollars coming to us in terms of state aid to the town, state aid education, and that'll continue. So you're right to look at the big picture, and this is the problem, that we just can't isolate ourselves here. We need to look at this big picture and see how it's going to affect us in the future. So thank you for your comments.
Please state your name for the record.
Jonathan Daly LaBelle, that young lady that was up here, I'm married to her. Yesterday was a perfect day, and thank you for coming out. I've been thinking about that day for a long time, and it went exactly as it should have. Okay, so I guess two things I'll say. One's on that. The town can weigh in on that, should weigh in on that. And it's not just a memorial, it's an education site that's unique in our community. So either our town council can weigh in, seeing that has extra value, or they can weigh in, seeing that it doesn't. The town council also needs to be worried about the health of its downtown, its Main Street, its businesses, all the people that are impacted who make their living there, and also the health of our tax base, which helps keep taxes low for everybody else in the community. So Wakefield, I think, was cited at last week's meeting as kind of being an economic engine for downtown, kind of an anchor store, and that seems to be a sentiment shared by most, if not all, of the merchants down there. So I think that goes beyond the school committee as well. That's the town council's responsibility to consider, and they can weigh in on the value of that, or they can weigh in saying that there is not value on that. How much of a tax increase is there going to be this year? I know you said that, but could you tell me again, please?
I've said to you that the estimated rate would be $14.15.
Okay, and but if there wasn't a revaluation, what would that, what's the, I guess I'm wondering what the increase on the average homeowner is.
I'm
Not so much in dollar terms, but just in percentage terms.
It should be relatively flat. There shouldn't be much of a tax increase for the person that has the average assessment value. But the reason that that's happening, as I mentioned earlier, is because there's movement as far as residential property values going down at a quicker rate than the commercial and industrial and utility base. So what's going to happen is you may not pay appreciably more dollars in taxes with the budget, even though we're raising $995,000 more, but the levy is still going up $995,000, and a goodly portion of that increase will be shared or redistributed to the commercial base itself.
And do you know what is it comparable to the increase from last year?
Jonathan, the tax levy increase is 1.54%. So if
Okay.
everything was equal to last year, then I think you could use that as saying that, probably everybody's bill would be going up by 1.5%. But obviously, there's a lot of different variables that are up in the air right now, so that may change based on the number of cars you own, based on how your values change in regards to the entire reval process.
Do you remember what last year's tax increase was?
I think it was 1.1% on the tax levy. Was it 12 cents?
12 cents. It went up from $11.97 to $12.09.
Yeah, so just over 1%.
It was
Oh.
1%.
Okay. To me, I know that 1.54 is more than 1.1, but it's still, I would put that as a pretty negligible increase. I was just looking over, past records and such, and 4 members of the town council sent a letter to the newspapers the first week of June last year, so not even a year ago. And I want to be respectful of the council's time. You might think that that's for a change, but, so I'm not going to read the whole thing. But it starts off by saying, and people can pull, they can Google this and, find the 1.3 million school budget cut, South Kingstown Town Council, and you can find it. But it says, as members of the South Kingstown Town Council, we are opposed to the reduction of the fiscal year 2009-2010 school budget by 1.3 million. So that's less than a year ago. That was last year. Fast forward to this budget year, and apparently the town council's fine with a cut of not 1.3 but 1.2, and this is necessitating potentially, another 900,000. The letter goes on to say, the question is what are our community's values? We think the education of our children is and should be high on everyone's list. On Tuesday, June 9th, we need your support to maintain and preserve our high-performing school system. The bottom line is that the quality of our town's educational system directly impacts our children's future, our property values, and ultimately the viability of our community. There's more in here, but I'll skip down to the bottom because everybody seems to focus in on the tax. I say tax responsibility, others say tax burden. Reduction proponents have also suggested that the property tax rate in South Kingstown is higher than in surrounding communities, and as such mean that South Kingstown taxpayers are paying a higher tax burden than those in other communities. Such a suggestion is disingenuous. A tax rate is nothing more than the result of dividing the needed tax levy by the amount of taxable property in a community. To simply compare property tax rates does not measure tax burden. A more appropriate measure to evaluate tax burden is to divide the total tax levy by the population of the community. The resultant per capita property tax provides a more comparable measure of tax effort. The most current information relative to per capita property tax can be found on the State of Rhode Island Department of Administration website, and it goes on to give that site. But it pulls out a few towns, and it says the data shows South Kingstown actually has the lowest tax per capita versus other compared towns. South Kingstown, 2,282. North Kingstown, 2,377. Narragansett, 2,458. Charlestown, 2,508. Westerly, 2,566. And Barrington, 2,949. please vote number 1 on Tuesday, June 9th at the Broad Rock School and keep our children exactly where they should be, number 1 in some of the best schools in the state. That was a request that you made out to the community, and this is not just me. I think you've heard loud and clear from so many people in the community. They're making the same request to you. Figure out a way to make our children number 1.
Polly?
Could I reply to some of the things that Jonathan, I don't know that we have given any indication of changing any of our,
Polly, is that on? Closer to it.
okay. I don't think we've given any indication of placing education on any lower level than we have always held it. It's been, the education of our children is, I think everyone here sitting at this table would say it's our primary interest in running the town. So we elect people to the school committee, and it is their job to run the schools. It is not our job to run the schools. You're mixing up two things. We are not doing something that you want us to do because it's legal. Let me read you something, because I happen to bring the law with me tonight. This is the Rhode Island statute that covers the obligation of the job that the school committee is asked to do when they're elected. And the general powers and duties of the school committee: the entire care, control, and management of all public schools shall be vested in the school committees. This is to identify educational needs in the community, to develop education policies, to meet the needs of the community, to provide for and assure the implementation of federal and state laws. This is in section 16-2-9 if you want to look it up. The evaluation of the performance of the school system. It is their obligation for the employment and discipline of school departments, and it goes on. It is the school committee that makes these decisions. It is not the town council. Our obligation is to transfer to the school the money that we think we can transfer. And that is what we are really looking at tonight. So, you know, to keep banging on an issue that we have nothing to do with may get you some publicity, but it's really not going to change my opinion of what the town council's job is. And certainly we support education in the town. We support the school committee. But that's an important issue that you seem not to be able to quite understand.
Is that all, Paul?
Yes, that's
Okay.
it.
Carol?
Yeah, Jonathan, as far as that letter, I remember that letter, and that was, I'm sure you recall the referendum last year. We passed the budget in May, and then we were facing a referendum that was cutting the budget we passed, the school budget, by $1.3 million. That letter was our response to the attempt to cut the budget, and it was heartfelt, and we still believe, I would write that letter again. I mean, up against more cuts by referendum, I would absolutely support that letter and all of the details in that letter. And I still, you know, we feel very strongly about schools, all of us, and especially those of us who wrote that letter. And if this budget is cut again, you'll see us support this budget again, if there's a referendum out there. So, with that said, I mean, that letter was written for a particular purpose, to support the budget that we believed was the best budget at the time, which it was. And we were able to prevail through that referendum. So, you know, this budget is a good budget under the, considering the times we're in. You know, we're to ask people to increase taxes any further than we've had to would be unfair to the public. And the school budget in this budget. I know you've said it, and we've said it before, and the school committee agreed to it, that this particular budget, if all of this money came through, does not include closing any school. That is what the school committee has assured us. Now, things are going to change. We know things may change. I'm not going to say they are. I don't know. But I just wanted to make that clear, that that letter was written in light of that whole referendum issue and in support of the budget that we passed last year.
I will say something too. It's taken a little bit out of context because that letter was actually written after Mr. O'Neill put a ad in the paper with his bombs. I don't think anybody could forget the bombs going off, and comparing to tax rates of the different communities. And what was interesting to me with that particular ad was that all year long he talked about North Kingstown, North Kingstown, North Kingstown. And then when it came time to put his ad out, North Kingstown was blatantly missing from that particular ad because Jim likes to compare tax rates, and that's what we were trying to put it on per capita. It's per person as really the most comparative way to look at your tax burden. And it was just, well, when we were talking about our tax rate that we were at, what was it, 12, what was it, I thought I wrote it down last year, 12, 19, 96. That North Kingstown wasn't in because their property tax rate was $13.51, so that blew that whole, pardon the pun, blew that whole thing out of the water because it didn't look right, because then on North Kingstown, which he had been touting all along as being a better community and done everything much better than us, was actually over the town of South Kingstown. That's where the addressing, and we got that in very, very late, right really before the election. A lot of it just went even on the websites because we didn't really have much of a chance to respond to it, to show that per capita is the way of doing it. But you have to look at what we were looking at. That was last year's budget, which was level funded to what we have to this year's budget. And I stick by the budget last year, as I'll stick by the budget this year. That was 1.3 over the level funding budget that we have this year, equivalent. So I wouldn't want to see $1.3 million be taken out of this budget, which I have a feeling we'll probably see happen again this year, just woman's intuition here. So that's what we were fighting for, last year's budget. So again, you're talking about a budget last year that worked for the schools, and then taking the $1.3 million out of it would certainly hurt the school system. So I just want to reiterate what was happening, and just kind of, I'm probably not even explaining this as well as I possibly could. It was a very emotional year. I remember us getting together to write that letter, but you have to put it in context of what was happening last year versus a budget this year that's level funded, and we actually, the school committee comes in, and as Mr. Alfred, I don't know if you were here earlier, explained, you might have come in a little bit late, that $1.2 million cut, the explanation of that budget. I think you've been through emails and back and forth that we've seen too, explaining that it wasn't really a $1.2 million cut. Most superintendents come in with a budget that doesn't start off where it doesn't stay at this top number that it starts at. Again, it's a process, and then here we are with what we have. The budget came through from the school committee. And then after this, we've had all the different issues with the funding formula coming forward, things that we're going to have to address, and that's why they have their targeted accounts, because they have to have contingencies, because things are going to come, things are going to be adjusted, and they have to have contingency to where things are going to fall out. But you have to put in perspective of what we were dealing with last year and what we're going to be dealing with this year too. So I just felt like I had to address that. So, anyways, Jim? I'm sure you were going to answer.
I thought I'd remain out of this for a while, but since I've been roasted here pretty well, I will remind everyone here that I don't care if you're talking about the education funding formula, it's done on a per-student basis. Charter schools, per-student basis. Jamestown's cost for their high school kids in North Kingstown, per-student basis. That is the best measure, because you can find communities with fewer children, higher populations, vice versa. You can play with those kind of stats on a per capita basis. The per student cost is what counts. And what I brought up last year was that with the same school population, Barrington was spending $12,300 per child. We were about $4,600 higher. Subtract out transportation, charter schools, we were about $4,000 higher. In other words, around $14 million. I took a look at North Kingstown. Property transfer just for their own kids was $5.5 million less than ours. We're $48 million. They were $42.5 million just for their population. But they educated 4,200 kids of the North Kingstown, not counting Jamestown. 4,200. We educated 3,500. 14 million ahead of them. Almost the same number for charter schools and transportation combined. That's how you do this. It is by a per-student basis. And the other thing is, which I think, and I'm sorry I didn't bring the stats, but for any town our size, 78% of the level of the levy, I think you've talked about this before, I don't see anyone in the council disagreeing with this comment, this town spends the highest percentage for any large community in this state on schools of our total budget. 78%. 77.7, whatever the number is. But that's one of the highest in the state. You've got to go to New Shoreham and very small population, student population communities to find anything that would match us. So boy, do we ever support schools. And that'll be my issue here with an amendment I'll make to on the floor when we go to take a look at this total budget for this year.
Kathy, could I just,
go ahead,
one of the
Steve.
comments that we continue to go back and forth on is that the school budget from the superintendent's budget was cut by 1.2 million. I want to make it clear, I just took a look at the 9-10 year. The superintendent's budget to what was the final budget was reduced by $983,000. So it's not dissimilar. Those reductions occur based on reviews that are made, suggestions that are made in terms of revisions, as well as policy reductions that are necessary in terms of program. But it is not unusual. In fact, it's more the rule than the exception that the manager's budget is going to include less in terms of transfer of taxes to the schools than they may request. Because their objective is to act as advocates on behalf of education. My responsibility is to try to look at the broader picture and to balance all of the competing needs that wish to be served throughout the budget process. So I want to make it clear that this isn't the first time that a superintendent's budget has been reduced, nor, I would suggest, is it going to be the last time.
No,
Nor is it the last time that a police department budget's been reduced or a public works budget has been reduced. Maybe not a finance department budget, but
He's tight, he's tight, he's tough, he's tight too.
usually I have to add money back in on Allen's, but all I'm suggesting is that if we look at the history, it isn't atypical.
No, it's like negotiations 101.
Yeah.
You go in, you shoot high, and then you come to an understanding and agreement. I understand, I've been through the process, I understand. State your name for the record.
Jonathan Daly LaBelle. Yeah, and I think that that's where, while I have a quarrel with you folks, the larger quarrel is with the school committee and the our last superintendent, I think, kind of knew the game. Shoot a little high, negotiating 101, come away with what you need. This new superintendent went right to the bare bone. And I wonder if that's what she was brought in for.
I don't think so, but that's just my opinion. I don't think that's what her rule was to do. I don't think that, I think that's unfair. But anyway, so we have anybody else want to speak? Please come forward, state your name for the record.
Teresa Tanzi. Jim, last time we met, this time last week, you said that you would know after the April 26th school committee meeting whether or not you were planning on submitting a referendum to cut aid to the schools. What is your decision?
My decision is still in limbo because the House and Senate have not come forward, and maybe we'll see something over the next week or two, but the numbers could drastically change. So like all the budgets you've heard about, school, town, even my situation is up in the air here as to what we'll hear from the state. And I am trapped here with about a 2-week window. I was hoping that the town, along with other cities and towns, if everyone needs 60 or 90 days to operate under the same umbrella, then I'd be able to figure it out. But right now, I have no idea what our schools are looking at, whether they're already going to be short 500,000 to $1 million, Where do I come in on that? And so, in other words, every one of us here, council, school committee, manager, and myself, this is a very difficult situation since we have no starting point.
So what would you need to hear from the General Assembly to prevent you from doing this year?
Well, there's a lot that I'd like to hear from the General Assembly. First of all, just to, whether we like it or not, just to have a number. We need a number. So for starters, motor vehicle. Starters, school aid. What are we going to see? There could be huge variables. When you're talking about $200 million current year, $400 million next year, the school aid cuts they're talking about could be double and triple what we're looking at. We see a 3.8% next year. We don't know if it's going to be any more this year. This is a huge variable. I don't think we have to hurt our school committee, our school budget, more than what I'm going to recommend here, because my recommendations will be such that no schools will be affected and maybe no jobs will be affected. That's what I was hoping to propose. There will be some sacrifice, but in places that could be sacrificed. But I'm not going to let the Wakefield School close. I'm not going to use their own consultants, the NESDEC numbers that tell me that the Curtis Corner could easily close. I don't care how many trailers we put at Broad Rock, we can do it. We had big numbers at Curtis Corner. We had almost 740 kids for a number of years back at Curtis Corner years ago with a 750 capacity population. There are a lot of combinations here, and I don't think we have to look at some of the worst case scenarios. So I'm putting together a number of scenarios based upon what I hope I hear from the General Assembly.
Okay. The unfortunate thing is that you don't have the ability to craft where those cuts would come from. You would just submit a resolution, according to my understanding, that would make a broad cut to the budget, and they would cut where they felt would be the best spot. So your submitting this resolution would not actually achieve your intended goal. So I just, unless I'm mistaken on that, that seems to be the big point from last year, that this would in fact hurt the quality of our schools, the quality of our community, and may in fact end up resulting in the closing of Wakefield Elementary School, even if we get everything that we would like to get from the General Assembly. So I just would like to point that out. Thank you.
I don't think that's correct, because I think they would use the Wakefield School closing to say, if you vote for anything I do, how do we hurt the children the most? Let's go right to the jugular. And that would be the Wakefield School closing, followed by art, music, and sports. That's how they operate.
Well, that's putting words in their mouth, but, okay. Anybody else? Please state your name for the record.
David Caprio. Good evening. Sorry, Steve, when I entered, you were just in the middle of your original presentation, and I heard you discussing the car tax proposal, and I thought I heard you say that this budget is based upon receiving zero from the state. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Okay, and as opposed to the current year, where you've received the first 3 quarters and the 4th quarter is still in limbo, correct?
That's correct.
So is it based upon still receiving zero for the 4th quarter of this year?
No, that has nothing to do with next year's budget. What we receive for the 4th quarter, whether it's half or whether it's the whole 4th
Correct.
quarter, will go into the budget that closes June 30th of this year. The budget that we're talking about this evening obviously starts on July 1st.
Right. Well, I guess the point of my question is, would receiving car tax for the current year, the 4th quarter payment, would that result in a surplus for this current year for the town?
Well, it's not going to be a surplus if, in fact, we get what we had originally been promised in the state budget. We have reduced the expenditure program in anticipation of losing that money.
Right.
So if what you're suggesting is we'll end up with a positive balance, yes, we will. But it's not because of not because we get a portion of the 4th quarter payment. It's because of the steps that we've had to take in advance so that we would end up in the black for June 30th of this year.
Right, and we've talked about
But
it.
if we do get 4th quarter payment in, which I hope we get the entire 4th quarter payment in, what that does is it adds to our fund balance to allow us to pay down taxes in a future year. This year's budget includes $1.2 million from fund balance. If we get in the additional fourth quarter payment, then that will allow us to increase what that fund balance is as a means of being able to maintain that $1.2 million in future years. So yes, the fourth quarter payment is important to us, but it doesn't play into the policy decisions the council needs to reach as far as the budget for the 10-11 year.
So for the budget we're speaking about tonight, what would have normally been given by the state, does this budget just provide that the town collected all themselves?
That's correct.
Okay.
Our assumption is that when the General Assembly finishes with the budget, there will be $0 from the motor vehicle tax. The assumption is also that the $6,000 that is relieved from the property taxpayer will be reinstated on the roll. Once it's reinstated on the roll, our rate is $18.71. So for every $6,000 that gets added back onto the roll, we're going to see $112.26 per motor vehicle increase because we've seen the loss from the state. If the state gives us the motor vehicle tax, which is about $2 million, then what we would see is being able to increase our revenue statement with an amendment to the budget. And what we would do is we would still be increasing our tax levy by $995,000, but we would, instead of having a rate of $14.15, it would be about $14.22. It would be up 7 cents, but people would not be paying more for the value of the motor vehicles. So if the average guy has 2 vehicles of $6,000, it's $225 a year that they're going to see as an increase if the General Assembly doesn't provide us with the same program, where they would save that $225 if General Assembly continued to fund that program, yet they would only pay 7 cents more on the tax rate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's just where I came in. So, the town would, how would the town, what would be the difference in the revenue from the town? Is your collection rate the same? I think the state pays 98% or something of what the
Yeah,
levy
we're not
would be
going
on
to
the
change
first
the
6,000?
collection rate as a result of where the property tax is coming from, whether it comes from the motor vehicle or whether it comes from the real estate.
Mhm.
I will say that the highest uncollectible of any of the tax classes is motor vehicles, but it's also a smaller portion of the overall roll. So it's not, you know, if we have to tax full value next year, we'll collect about $4.3 million of $65.5 million from motor vehicles. So yes, that's harder to collect, and that's what the intent of the legislative program was, to get rid of the tax on motor vehicles altogether. We just haven't been able to see that accomplished.
And it was a good program. Well, we could afford it back, when, I guess, what, 10,
I think
12
it's still a
years ago.
very good program.
Yeah, well, if we could afford it, Steve.
You know, David, as I've said to you before, I don't look at this as state aid. I look at this as a remittance of the income and sales tax that the residents of this town pay. So, I mean, we can call it state aid, but you wouldn't have the dollars to transfer back if our taxpayers weren't paying them.
Right. I know we've had this discussion, but the governor's supplemental, when it came out earlier in the year, had eliminated both the third and the fourth
Yes, it did.
quarter. And I know you've made some difficult adjustments to compensate for that. The third quarter was paid, and the House version of the state budget included almost 85 or 90% of the fourth quarter, and as we all know, the Senate didn't agree with the entire budget, so we're still in that limbo.
Right, if your supplemental had gone through, we would get 85% of what the promise had been for the 10-year.
And I guess my question
Yes, we're
is,
still looking forward to that.
I know you had made adjustments expecting nothing, expecting zero, as the governor's budget was.
Yeah, I have no choice, but since, you know, I don't have a budget from the General Assembly for the 11 year, I have no choice other than to budget based on what the governor's proposal was to you. I'm certainly hopeful that the General Assembly is going to change that proposal that's been tended by the governor, but at this point, we can only assume with the types of reductions that are going to be required with the state budget that even the greatest increase in the May revenue estimating conference isn't going to make up the $427.4 million that was forecast as being a shortfall for the 11 year. So,
Yeah, I agree. But
you don't have to agree.
my,
You can tell me no.
the point of my question is just specifically on the tax, on the car tax. It wouldn't be able to be used if we were to restore those funds from the governor's proposals. That wouldn't create a surplus for you to be able to use in other areas that have been discussed tonight. That's the essence of my
In the 10, 11
question.
year, no, because it's really a case of if we get the money from the state, we're not taxing the residents. If we do get the money from the state, if we get the money from the state, we're not taxing. If we don't get the money from the state, we're forced to do the taxing.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Is there anybody else who'd like to talk? Okay.
Move approval of the town council's final budget for federal year 2010-2011 as amended, and is shown on Exhibit 1.
Okay, first, can we close the public hearing? That's probably the best thing to do. Okay. Sorry, Polly, I just put my thing over
Yeah.
my...
I move we close the public hearing.
Okay.
Second?
Been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Now, Polly, if you'd like to do that, I'm sorry.
I move approval of the town council's final budget for federal year 2010-2011 as amended, and as shown on Exhibit 1 attached here too.
Okay, thank you, Polly.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Jim?
I'd like to further amend a reduction of $1,550,000 from the property tax transfer to the schools, which I'm looking on the front page of the newspaper is $47,605,101. I've been using $47,909,000. Which number should I use, Steve?
I'm sorry, Jim, I'm having trouble hearing you.
God, these things. $1,550,000. I have asked, as an amendment, to reduce the property tax transfer to the schools, but which number am I reducing it from? On the front page, I've got $47,605,101. In some of the other material we have, I've got $47,909,000, which,
The transfer to the school fund is $47,909,000. If you're looking to reduce that, you would be reducing that number by $550,000.
$1,550,000.
I beg your pardon, $1 million? I was
$1,550,000.
better off with the mic turned off.
Yes.
All right, so the number is $47,909,000.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Jim has an amendment. Is there a second to his amendment?
Is there a discussion on it?
Would you like to discuss it? It's not being seconded, so. All right, so we're back to Polly's motion to include the public hearing, and Carol has seconded. Any other further discussion?
Well, if that's where I have to do the discussion, then I'd
All
like
right,
to have
well,
some
if you do
discussion on,
now, your amendment failed.
on Polly's. Yeah, my amendment failed, obviously, a consensus of 4 to 1. How do I come up with my $1,550,000?
Wait a minute, I just want to clarify. There was no vote on that. The amendment failed because there was no second, so it wasn't a
There
formal.
was no second,
There was
so
no
there
second, there
was
was
no
no vote.
motion.
There was no vote, right.
Right.
Okay, just want to clarify.
Right.
Get it
No, I
right.
just said a consensus, that there was certainly no
Okay,
vote.
so there was a vote, but go ahead.
Yeah, my $1,550,000, I'm looking at $750,000. That's be a 15% health copay on behalf of the teachers. Had this been in effect now, a 15% rate now, which would have been most fitting in the 2008 contract. So that's $750,000. Added to that, $600,000. This is a result of the salaries. If the 3.05% that represented 2/3 of our teaching staff over 10 years, if that were reduced to 1.5%, and the 1% salary gain that the contract allowed for each of the first 10 steps, when they're already getting 7%, I think my math is pretty close. I come up with about $600,000 difference. And then, of course, the buybacks written about today's paper, which I've been all over for years, of $200,000. I think we're at $225,000 or $230,000. Those three together are $1,550,000. So that's why I would like to, obviously why I put forward my amendment, which was not seconded, but in terms of Polly's discussion, just so you know where I'm coming from on that money. And if you want to know where that money would come from, I really believe that when the school committee put this contract together back in 2008, I think everyone knows how upset I was on it. And the council president at the time, Mrs. Eddy, I think was as upset as I was. She was on the front page of the newspapers, and I quote, "Eddy hits teachers' pack as too quick and too much." And like myself, she referred, we didn't have the governor's budget. The state was going hundreds of millions of dollars into debt, and why so soon? And obviously, I was a lot more vocal than Mrs. Eddy, but Mrs. Eddy, I really respect and appreciate all her years of public service, and she hit it nail on the head there. And this is why we've got such a high budget where we are today. Our school budget should be quite a bit lower, but this is one of the reasons that we're in difficult shape. I would recommend, and if I move forward on this, I would recommend that this money be used from the undesignated fund balance. We're sitting on about $2 million plus of taxpayer money. And I might add that taxpayer money really is accumulated since the budget referendum back in 2004-05. Matter of fact, we've almost accumulated $3 million of surplus the last few years. The town has used between $350,000, $400,000 each year. But it's a piggy bank, and I think it belongs to the taxpayers. And by using that, there needs to be no hurt, especially to a Wakefield school closing. This way, when the contract discussions begin here, hopefully sooner than later, that these will be an easy target. Hopefully, we'll see co-pays at 20%. Hopefully, we'll see salaries even less than what I recommended, and hopefully, we eliminate those buybacks. But we can do this without closing Wakefield School. We can get a real budget so we don't have to use this piggy bank. And as you know, I've been very disturbed for years about the hiring bonanza that took place when Broad Rock opened. We're still living, and if any of you are good with mathematics, when you have a 17.6% budget increase back in 2001-2, followed by 8.5% the following 3 years, even if you take 2 flat years currently and the budget reduction in 04-05, we're still above 6, almost 6.25 compounded, and that's averaging 2% student population loss per year. This makes no sense. This is absolutely ridiculous. So anyway, that's where I'm headed with this. Obviously, I am hoping that the budget could be even greatly increased in its reduction if I could get from the General Assembly substantial pension savings. And right now, just to give you a couple ideas why I'm really hoping that Mr. Caprio and his comrades up there, specifically his brother, do what I think is necessary here. Currently, to give you an idea, our teachers are paying in approximately $2,550,000 for their share at 9.5%. All right, but total town and state, I guess we could call ourselves the employers, we're contributing almost double that. So just think, if we just match, instead of $5.5 million, that's what the town and the state are contributing to that same group working in South Kingstown. More than double the $2.55 million that the teachers are putting in. If we could get half that money back, just match the pension contributions, which is unheard of in the world of private sector. It's still an incredible golden parachute, an incredible pension plan. Obviously, we're not probably going to see something that deep. That's a place we've got to aim towards, and maybe with a combination IRA, 403Bs, whatever we come up with, that may have to be the final result. But just think what an extra $2,850,000 would be to this town for our schools, for open space, across the board. Just think about that. And everything I just said here is no harm. It is fair Imagine paying 15 or 20% for your copay. That's fair. That's reasonable. Look at everyone else who's paying into this, private sector. Look at these pensions. They're still incredible. No one in the private sector has that. And of course, the buybacks speak for themselves. So everything I presented here tonight is absolutely fair, on the money, treats everybody, and brings this divide that the public sector has now over the private sector workers. It's got to get closer. Otherwise, you're looking for really a taxpayer revolt or maybe even class warfare at some point, because this spread can't continue. So, Polly, I'm sorry I got a little off your amendment, which I'm not going to support, but thank you for the discussion, so now you know where I'm coming from.
Carol, do you want to speak?
Yeah, I'd just like to comment on Jim's proposed reduction. You can't be fooled by an amendment that would try and cut $1,550,000 with a statement saying, we will keep Wakefield School open. What you're trying to do, Jim, is renegotiate the teacher contract, which we cannot do that. That's a school committee's job. Polly so eloquently stated, as she read the law, it's very clear. You can make all the cuts you want, but you cannot direct the school committee how to do it. And if you cut that amount of money and then say, oh, attached to that, we're not going to close Wakefield School, I don't even know how that would be possible.
I guess you didn't listen to me. I said I was going to use the undesignated fund balance, which has over $2 million, and what these recommendations by myself would do would give a hint to the school committee negotiators for next year of targets.
What makes you think they don't already feel this in their negotiating process?
Their history from 2008 is absolutely one of malfeasance to how they addressed that contract then.
Well, I think it's going to be a whole different story next year. I mean, I
I
don't
hope
see
you're
how
right,
it can't
Carol.
be.
I hope you're right,
But I mean,
Carol.
what you're trying to do is mislead the public into thinking that you can take away the $1.5 million and not close schools and direct the school committee to do things that you have no power to do.
Again, from the undesignated fund balance, that's where I'm targeting.
Anybody else? Ella, did you have something?
I was really hoping that this town council would not even acknowledge what was just said. Jim, I really think you led a lot of parents along, keeping Wakefield Elementary School open. I do support what Carol said. It is not the purview of this table, and I understand the undesignated, fund balance, but that is not our purview here at this town council table. You really need to make a decision. Are you going to run for school committee, or are you going to run for town council? Because what you've just talked about is negotiation items with the school committee and the union. That is out of our purview. I was really hoping that the town council would just remain silent and not even respond to the lunacy that we just listened to. I'm sorry.
Again, I think we, gentleman just said, the buck stops with us. We're the leaders of this town. I understand from last week's motion that I had, I even went from my resolution to urging, can we urge the school committee not to consider Wakefield in any environment? I have been on this council for 10 years. I cannot conceive, if we were down to 300 children left in this town, that Wakefield wouldn't be a survivor. 1 through 6, Broad Rock 7 through 12. I just can't conceive under any scenario keeping the health of this town, business-wise, and its energy level, vibrancy, all of it we've been through before. I can't see of any scenario where Wakefield would ever be closed.
Okay. I think I'm going to let it go. I think, Ella, you're right. I'm not even going to touch that one. I think both you ladies said it eloquently.
I think we send more of a message with our
I
silence.
absolutely agree. Strongly agree. Okay, on that, I hear no more discussion. There is a motion. It's been seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Dale, roll call, please.
Council President Fogarty?
Aye.
Council Vice President Eddy?
Aye.
Councilwoman McAtee.
Aye.
Councilman O'Neill.
Nay.
Councilwoman Whaley.
Aye.
The vote is 4-1, and it passes, the budget passes 4-1. Let's move on. 2, new business item.
Excuse me, Ms. Fogarty, I'm going to excuse myself. I find myself not in company.
Oh, that's quite all right. Sorry to feel that you feel that way. Have a good evening, Mr. O'Neill. We'll do the rest of the town's business for you. Okay, new business item, a resolution authorizing fund transfers as shown on Exhibit 2, attached here too. Are there any questions? Do I have a motion then?
I move approval of new business item A, a resolution authorizing fund transfer, as shown on Exhibit 2.
Okay, it's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion from council? No? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The vote passes 4-1. Let it be known Mr. O'Neill has left and did not want to vote. New business item B is a resolution authorizing tax collection procedures as shown on Exhibit 3, attached here too.
Is that 4-0?
4-0, I'm sorry, did I say 4-0?
I thought you said 4-1.
Oh, I'm sorry, 4-0. Correct that. Check myself. 4-0, and Mr. O'Neill has left,
I noted Mr. O'Neill's leaving.
has not done his responsibilities. Okay, a resolution authorizing tax collection procedures is shown in Exhibit 3A, attached here too. Council, take a look at those. We'll discuss these, the things.
On Exhibit 3, you need to insert the dollar amount in the first paragraph,
Okay,
which would be 65 million, we can round it $500,000.
could you say that again? I'm sorry, Steve.
65 million, $65 million.
Oh, $65 million. I thought you said 500,000.
$65 million even.
Okay, even, okay.
No, $65,500,000.
Oh, five,
okay.
okay.
$65,500,000.
All right, that's what I thought I heard the first time, sorry. The chamber is not doing well for our hearing tonight. It's really bouncing around up here. Okay. Are there any questions for Steve regarding that number? No? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve new business item B?
You got it, Paul.
I move approval of item B.
Been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 4-0. Again, noting that Mr. O'Neill has left and not decided to vote with us. Okay. Next is, I guess, a motion to adjourn. Unless
I
you want
move
say-
to adjourn.
Second?
I moved and seconded. Well, the voting's done, but if you have a question, sure, we'll honor
Not
it.
about adjournment, but just about the whole process this evening.
Quickly, yes, sure.
Okay, Francis Crowley, Matunic. I've been to most of the town council meetings since March, and I've come to praise Caesar again this evening, I guess, Mr. Alfred. And he gave a very candid overview of what we're up against with the state and the town. And we've been through the agonies of the budgeting process, and not picking on who's supposed to do what, but I also attended the school committee meeting last week. And I was in the private business area for 40 years. I'm retired. When you have a budgeting issue where you have unknowns, you budget for the worst-case scenario. What is the school committee going to be faced with if the town comes back and says, you're not $926,000 short, you're $1.7 million short? Now, I understand Mr. O'Neill going out tonight a little frustrated, but I think in essence that's what he was trying to do. You know, I don't think that we know anything with any degree of certainty as to what we're going to get from our friends in Providence. And I just think when we value education in this town so highly, I've been cliched to death for the last 3 months about this, and I have some different opinions about public education that I won't go into this evening. But I just want to know, how does the process work if we're $1.5 million short, or $1.6 million versus the 926, Steve, I believe is what we started looking for, and there could be additional money. How does it work? That's my question.
By state law, the school committee is responsible for having a balanced budget.
Yeah.
They have the responsibility to be able to adjust that budget accordingly, which
Okay.
means that if they do not get the revenue that they anticipate from the state, they're going to need to do really one of two things: either cut program, or they're going to need to tap another revenue source. So they're then going to have to come up with a balanced budget. Now, certainly if it's $1.6 million, it's much different than if it's $500,000.
And I'm just taking that number as a case.
But all I'm saying to you is
Yeah.
that I'm not sure that it would get that high, but if they did, the budget process is such that we would have to look at an amendments to the budget.
Okay.
Does that mean additional taxes?
Yeah.
That would require supplemental tax bills. I mean, the cost of doing that would be quite substantial.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the case. They may need to look at a one-year solution, looking at using more than the $484,000 that they've got, that they're using from fund balance.
Okay.
We wouldn't recommend that be increased by any large dollar amount, because it just creates a one-time revenue that would create problems in the future year.
Absolutely, yeah,
I
understood.
mean, the real issue is that as we go forward, it's not a case of us being able to replace lost dollars with increased tax levy.
No.
And they're going to have to make adjustments.
Yeah, and that's the reason I asked the question, really, because, again, at that school committee meeting, Superintendent Stringfellow went up and went through her iterations, the various iterations for the schools and the impact and what it would take, and ultimately, based on that NESDEC survey, what she thought you could save. And obviously, everybody's sensitive about Wakefield because you're talking $692,000. But quite honestly, the only slide in that whole presentation that made any sense to me was the first one, the budget reduction process matrix, in which she put up 5 areas from which they could secure additional revenues. The only one on it that makes any sense, and the only one on it where they can do anything, is the first one, which, and my eyes are going, labor contract concessions, benefit contract concessions. The rest of it, they're whistling in the wind. The $668,000, we take a librarian from here, we do this, we do that. That's fluff. And I just, I'm trying to, again, I guess it's that budgeting process I'm used to, plan for the worst. Her matrix here goes up to, if she's got to cut $1.5 million. And, she said, I guess I'll show how old I am, some people, they populate the field, other people fill in the boxes. I'm just wondering if there's any progress on that, or they owe you anything on that, work
My
in progress?
understanding is that they are looking at a meeting, I believe it's May 20th, I think it's May,
May 25th.
is it 21st?
Oh, they have their meeting.
I think it was May 20th that they have, that they are supposed to be closing in on it. They have to make final decisions
Yeah.
on what they're going to do, I think, by
Okay.
May 25th.
Right.
Because they've got to advise teachers as to whether they're
Yeah.
coming back or not. So
Okay.
there's, they've got to make their decisions with or without a state budget by May 25th. I think that they're planning on trying to use the matrix to decide what would be the first 300, 500, 800.
Yeah, and that's the way she's got it structured. But again, when you look at the fields from which they can take money, there's only one that really makes any sense. The rest of it, they're never going to get to where they need to get to. And
I would agree with it, and that's why I've been asking since February to have that type of information prepared, because
Yeah.
the contingencies are going to be necessary, and regardless of what we get for a budget for that the General Assembly passes, we also have to have concerns on whether or not that budget will pass muster throughout the course of the year.
Yeah.
If it doesn't, and there's supplemental reductions that are necessary, there's got to be flexibility in anybody's budget to be able to accommodate that.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not what it's been for the last 20 years.
And it's not going to be either. Yeah.
Those dollars are not going to come back.
Yeah.
So
And I think people...
every budget, and that's why, I mean, when you look at the budget that the council just adopted,
Yeah.
the proposed budget is less than what we actually spent 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And
That's a good start.
we're anticipating that that's going to
Yeah.
continue.
Thank you. for saying
Yeah.
that. Ella,
Okay.
did you have something, Ella?
Okay.
I just wanted to respond, Francis. I too was at that meeting as well as the April 13th meeting. And she has allocated, I'm glad that you finally referenced the matrix, and she
Yeah.
has allocated a certain amount, of chunks of money, and this
Yeah.
will go and this will go. But I think in reference to what you're talking about with salaries, she had that in her PowerPoint of areas that she could not touch until the contract had expired. And I just wanted to clarify a few dates. May 20th, school committee meeting is supposed to be to discuss the 5th grade moving to Broad Rock Middle School. That date was scheduled for May 11th. They've moved that to May 20th with a date of May 25th to take it to a vote where they're going to take the funds from and the decisions that they're going to make. So it's
Well,
my understanding that the salary item was on her PowerPoint, was areas that she could not touch.
It doesn't indicate that here.
So if you are requesting that that's where the school committee should go, in presentations that I've been in front of the school committee,
Yeah.
they have a legally binding contract. I know that they did say that night that they have had conversations and they're continuing with the union, but she did pick 5 different areas that could not be touched.
Okay,
So
I didn't interpret it that way that evening. I thought that they said they were talking about that.
they,
and
they
she put
did
it on
say
the
that.
matrix.
They did
Yeah.
say that the conversations are happening.
Okay. Because I think, and again, I was not privy to what went on in 2008. Wasn't that contract done early for the
Yes.
convenience of somebody? Was it the teachers or was it the town?
I can't speak to that. No, we can't speak to that. We weren't on the negotiating
We
team.
weren't.
No, but that's a
Right.
statement of fact. That's not a negotiation. It either did or
I
didn't.
think that's opinion. That could be somebody's opinion on that. I'm not going to state
Okay.
my opinion on that one. That's just in conjecture.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this, and one more question. I'm sorry, this is the world's longest question. It seems that a lot of other towns in the state are going back and having dialogue and trying to get concessions and are getting concessions out of the unions. And I am just, and again, I don't know that much about the school committee, but I would think that, that's where you have to start. And if they haven't, or they're not going to, and there's nobody here in the room, I'm not going to take a shot at them. That's disappointing. And as we sit here, and in my mind, $58 million is enough money to run the school system. I mean, you're talking over $17,000 a kid. That's a lot of dough. And when you look at what other systems do, and I know, they're not straight apples to apples or, whatever, it sticks out like a sore thumb. And I just think that maybe, the days of optimum this and optimum that, we got to hunker down, we got to get tough. Private industry is doing it, the town's got to do it, and this is not meant to turn into a sermonette, but I just, in the back of my mind, when you can get shorted, you will, and I'm just hoping that we don't hear $1 million, $1.25 million, $1.5 million, but, we're not getting too much from Providence, so, thank you.
Yeah, and Mr. Crowley, I think Ella said that they are, there has been some talks. We don't know, we're not.
Yeah, and again, you don't know, and I'm not.
We're not privy to what it is, but there are talks.
No,
So
I
to say
don't-
that they should, they are.
Yeah, but it's got to be part of the process.
Mm-hmm.
There's too much at stake here for everybody, and I just hope that is happening.
Right. And they
Thank you.
stated, and I'm sure that it is. So, again, been moved and seconded. All those in favor to adjourn, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. And the meeting is adjourned at 8:45. Thank you.